guys, welcome to Kenganda, where we show you different aspects of life in Kenya and in Uganda. My name is Ara, and I'm going to be taking you through today's episode. With me is a gentleman who has actually been across 9 African countries on a motorbike. I'll pause and let that sink in. He actually traveled to 9 African countries on a motorbike. So I thought this was a very interesting trip, and I wanted to bring him over here, interview him, and we film this for you guys. So I have very many questions to ask him, but before we get into the questions, I want to ask him to introduce himself, and then we go ahead with this.
Wow, how do I introduce myself? It would have been so much easier if you asked the different things I should cover in my introduction. Anyways, my name is Victor Okoth. I'm a 24-year-old Ugandan student. I study civil engineering, and I just love Africa, that's all.
Okay. So the very first question that goes through my mind is, how did you come up with the whole idea of traveling across Africa and moreover on a motorbike? You know, that makes it very unique, because very many people have traveled across Africa but not on a motorbike, at least not any that I've heard of. So I want to know, how did you get this idea?
So how did I get the idea? I think to talk about that in a informative way, I would have to talk about Pan-Africanism for a start, which is something that I think many people have heard about and relates to the unity of all African people and peoples of African descent. So one important thing, one Pan-African development, is the African Union Agenda 2063, which kind of shows how Africa should develop economically, socially, politically between 2013 and 2063. So one thing that's important, a very important goal there, is freedom of movement in Africa by all Africans, which is kind of being achieved or through this thing called the African passport, which if you have, should allow you to travel to all African countries without need for a visa. And we think, at least because I traveled with my brother actually, I don't think I said that earlier, but we felt that the commitment that we'd made to achieve this thing by 2018 was we're not really making progress towards that commitment. And so our aim was to just like travel and raise awareness that this thing exists, and to get people in a way aware, and therefore demand that our leaders fulfill this promise. Yeah.
So that, I think you've covered my next question, because my next question was the purpose of the trip. So if I've got you right, the purpose of the trip was for you to put an effort in the processing of the African passport.
Yeah, very precisely and simply put. That was the main idea. Yeah.
Okay. So why did you choose to use a motorbike? Why didn't you use buses? Why didn't you use aeroplanes? Why a motorbike? What were your reasons?
Adventure is that we think we wanted something that we would be able to control. So it was also very convenient. If you're in a bus, you have to stick to a very strict timetable, or an airplane, like you have to be at the airport at a given period. While with a motorbike, you just wake up whenever you decide to wake up, start whenever you want to start, stop whenever you want to stop, take pictures whenever. So it was very convenient. It was also definitely less costly. And we also, something that's important to me at least is that Pan-Africanism tends to be associated with the elite, our elite. And I feel like the boda is, or the motorcycle, at least in Uganda and in Eastern Africa, etc. And even in West Africa, I think, is a symbol of being non-elite. So it was also symbolic that something that is not very fancy is actually symbolic of something that's Pan-African. Yeah.
So he said boda boda. What he means by boda boda is a motorcycle. We refer to them as boda boda here in Uganda. I hope you understood that. So like he said, a motorbike would be...
A motorcycle for public transport.
Okay, yeah, a boda boda is a motorcycle used for public transport. Yeah, thanks for the correction. So like he said, a motorbike would be cheap, would be convenient, would be adventurous and all that. Which brings me to my next question. How much did the whole trip cost?
Well, the trip cost something like around $10,000.
Wow. Wow, that's a lot. $10,000 is a lot. So if you're saying the motorbike was cheap and you actually spent $10,000, how much do you think it would cost if you traveled by an aeroplane or a bus?
I didn't make those estimations. Maybe we would need maybe some
Like
$50,000, or who knows? I don't know. It would be very costly.
Okay, so how did you come up with the $10,000? Did you save? Did you ask people to give you the money? Was someone sponsoring the project? How did you come up with the $10,000?
Well, first we saved. We saved every coin that we earned for maybe like 2 years.
Let me cut you through. When you say we saved, you and who? You?
Me and my brother, we were traveling together, all right? So my brother and I. Then we didn't have enough money to do that, so we also looked for sponsors, corporate sponsors, people that would support this journey. Unfortunately, that wasn't very successful, so almost everyone that we looked to turned us down at the time. So we then did crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is where you ask so many people to give you small amounts of money, and so all our friends, family, associates, classmates, etc. Basically, we reached out to everyone, and through that we were able to get a significant amount of money. And yeah, I also borrowed a bit to cover up the
Wow.
what couldn't be covered.
You said you borrowed some of the money, so what gave you the courage to borrow this money? Did you have any way of paying it back, or you just borrowed for the sake of having the trip?
I know ultimately that I'd have to pay it back, which is why I borrowed it. Yeah.
Pay it back with what? Do you have a source of income or something?
Oh, I only borrowed to the extent. So I was a student, and as a student, I would get some kind of like allowance or stipend. So I borrowed only to the extent that I would be able to pay that amount back in a year's time. Yeah.
So as you've heard, he actually borrowed money, but his plan of paying it back was through his student allowance.
Yes.
How interesting. Not very many people would do that. So if I may ask, would you kind of tell us how much, a rough estimate of your budget, like how much you spent on food, how much you spent on accommodation, how much you spent on the motorbike and all that?
The motorbike itself cost about 1,000, maybe $400 around. It was a small Yamaha Crux. It's this thing that's been produced by Yamaha for the African market. So it was that was the bike. Then we had to go through training because my brother had to actually get rider training for a car and motorcycle, so we'd get lots of practice on the road. That cost another maybe $500 just processing, like learning to ride and processing permits, etc. Then we had to get an international license, which cost us some maybe $200. Miscellaneous things, just traveling there. Food itself probably cost something like just a bit over $2,000, I would say, because that was what traveling for about 3 months. Okay, for about 3 months. Then we had to process. Then fuel. What was the cost of fuel? Accommodation was also very expensive.
Okay.
Well,
That's
I need to think
roughly
about.
it.
I mean,
So let me ask the question that I should have begun with. I hope you guys also had this question in mind. Can you please name first the countries that you went to? Like, where did you start from? Where did you end the journey?
so we did a circuit. We started at the equator in Uganda, then moved to Kenya. Kenya were in Nairobi, then moved to Tanzania. We went to Dar es Salaam, visited Zanzibar for a bit, then continued down to Malawi. From Malawi, we went to Zambia, rode through all of Zambia and entered Zimbabwe. From Zimbabwe, we went to Botswana. We did manage to get through to Southern Africa. We just just reached the border, so we didn't get to South Africa. And then from Botswana, we went to the border in Namibia. We also just got into Namibia, but we weren't allowed to go there because we didn't actually, our visas weren't approved for that. And so from Botswana, we did a circuit around back to Zimbabwe and Zambia and Tanzania and back to Uganda, basically.
Um,
And a short foray to like Rwanda and back.
okay. What was the issue with your passports that prevented you from getting into Namibia?
We were not able to process visas. Our visas were rejected, and I think the reason is that we applied for them in Zimbabwe as opposed to Tanzania.
Oh.
So what happens, I think, is that countries can only process have embassies in different countries. So not all countries have an embassy in every other country, and so if you're a citizen of a given country, you would be able to get a visa to go to another country only in a very specified place, which is something that the information that we had didn't reflect that. So we plan to get visas in Zimbabwe and Botswana, and the embassies there could not process visas for us. So yeah, that was a very important reason. Yeah.
Okay, so this brings me to another question, which is very intense. If you're a parent and you're watching this, I don't know what you would think if your son told you that he's going to go across about 9 African countries on a motorbike. You'd imagine the condition, the weather, and all that, and I don't know what would go through your mind. So I want to ask Victor. I want him to tell us what his parents, relatives, siblings thought about this adventurous idea of his.
Well, they thought it was suicidal. They thought it was a big suicide mission, and yeah, so they were very, very worried. But luckily, we managed to get it back. That's what I can say very briefly. But they also we had to explain everything to them, like literally lay down our plan, the concept, what we needed to do, how we would get money, how we would take care of safety, security, how we would take care of food, how we would make sure that we are not we basically mostly safety, right? What we would do, and so we had to satisfy our parents.
Give them
over a
satisfactory
period. Tell them,
explanations.
give them satisfactory explanations, show them our plans, show them our routes, agree where we were going to pass, where we were not going to pass, make sure that we'll be online, and update them about every development that would be taking place, be sure that we're not going to run out of money in a foreign country. So it took about an intense period of 6 months of just explaining to our parents. Luckily, they supported the whole initiative. Ultimately, it's like, and so I'm personally very grateful to them. It was also very important that I was traveling with my brother, who is younger than me, because I'm the firstborn in my family, and I would be thinking, well, if you're going to die, you might as well just not die with your brother. Leave us with at least another son. Like, why don't you go with another friend of yours, but yeah, they thought it was a suicide mission.
Okay. So, but I think that was very good of them. I think it was very satisfying that they tried to find out your plan, a laid down strategy, and try to at least find explanations to know that you'll be safe in a foreign country. So that brings me to the next question. Can you please tell us the different experiences you had on the road? What different things did you experience on the road?
Well, first, the thrill of riding on the road is an experience in and of itself. I think anybody that visits Africa need to just get onto a border and feel the thrill of going down a highway at 60 or 90 kilometers an hour. The experiences, the different food in all the different countries and the cuisine, that was amazing. People were generally very kind to us, and they couldn't believe every time we had to explain something. We also spoke a lot on all kinds of media, so we were interviewed in newspapers and on TV and on radio speaking about Pan-Africanism, and so it was really fulfilling to see that it's something that many people think about and question and try to develop. We also got to meet so many amazing people from all walks of life. It was also a touristy thing, so just for example, riding along Lake Malawi, you ride along the highway and the lake is just over there, or being in the Rift Valley in Kenya, or riding through the desert in Botswana, or the Victoria Falls in Zambia and Zimbabwe, which is just like a very hypnotic experience in and of itself. So it was a lot of adventure, a lot of excitement, some frustrations here and there when we got like punctures or just reached a place and it was dark and we didn't know where we were, or just the bike just like failing to work, or running out of fuel where there is no fuel except on the black market. So it was a lot of experiences. Like I could just talk about this forever.
Okay. You've covered up the challenges I wanted to ask, and you've covered up the experiences. So I guess I'll just go to the accomplishments and the lessons learned. What positive things did this trip help you gain, help you accomplish? Do you feel like you accomplished your purpose?
So earlier I spoke about the need for an African passport, which was in an overarching way what we were looking for. So the sub goals within that is that we wanted to experience for ourselves how difficult it is for an African to travel in Africa, which is something that everybody knows. It's very difficult to travel in Africa. So we managed to do that. The difficulties is everybody talks about corruption. So it's actually very heartwarming for me when I crossed borders in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Zambia, etc., without seeing any overt corruption. Maybe there's something, but nobody asked us for money. There's only one place where somebody literally asked us for money, so it was actually it's not a vice that we've totally gotten rid of, but I felt that we made progress. Also, the roads are rumored to be very, very bad, but we traveled on kind of like nice roads, so that was amazing. Some roads were really crappy, but mostly our roads are really good. And where the roads are not the best, there is some, like, at least they're under reconstruction or something, so that was interesting to find out. It was also very amazing for me just to think of how big Africa is. Like when you see it on a map, you're like, this is a kind of like small place, but it's really massive. But something else that was also very important is to kind of just like, it sophisticated my own understanding of Africa and Pan-Africanism and the diversity that we have on the continent, and how I think that all that is important and should be celebrated and should kind of be used to like develop Africa. The other thing was, we're talking about accomplishments, right?
Yeah.
Is that we were trying to develop a network of journalists and influencers and people that are interested, that think similarly, for a campaign that we plan to run later on, collecting signatures for a petition to parliaments to actually pass legislation supporting or implementing the African passport that we would like to present to African parliaments before 2023. So we managed to get lots of connections and to work, for example, with the Afro Champions, which are a group of multinational businessmen that would like to encourage private sector participation in the whole continental integration or the common market of Africa. So we managed to accomplish that and to visit most of the countries that we wanted to. We didn't go to everything because we wanted to go all the way up to West Africa, but since we couldn't get into Angola and Namibia, and we couldn't use the Congo because that wasn't very safe, we're also running out of money, so we basically accomplished everything that was feasible for us to accomplish given the constraints that we also had at the time. So we felt very accomplished at the end of it all.
Wow. I believe you've learned something, or you've gotten to experience a whole different other thing that you had never thought of. I would have him here all day so that he tells us all the stories about the trip, but that would be impossible. We don't want to make this too long. I believe I've tried to cover some of your questions. Thank you so much for watching. We're going to end this here. Please subscribe down below. If you have any questions, comments, ideas, opinions, feel free to leave them down below in the comment section. Give this video a like, and we'll see you in another one. Bye-bye.